The following episode is a special presentation of Higher Journeys Radio, a tribute to Dr. Wayne Dyer. Best-selling author, therapist, and life coach Dr. Laurie Nadel didn't just know Wayne Dyer, she was touched by him. In 2006, Dr. Laurie found herself dealing with an unexpected shift, having been a regular columnist for the New York Times, when she was thrust into unknown waters. It was a meeting with Wayne Dyer and his signature words of wisdom that gave Dr. Laurie the courage and inspiration to move on with a renewed sense of purpose and vigor. In this tribute to Dr. Dyer, she shares her experiences with him, her thoughts about him, and the bigger story that he spent so much of his time determined to impart to millions of people all over the world: the importance of shifting into the afternoon of your life. Wayne Dyer, I affectionately called him the spiritual man with the churning hand, always visually expressive, always passionate about sharing his wisdom, and always available to those who crossed his path. Well, Dr. Laurie Nadel is one who has crossed his path on several occasions. In fact, they were good friends. But each time their paths crossed, she was left with an indelible imprint of the man who can be aptly called the true father of self-help. We're fortunate today to have Laurie with us to share her recollections and intimate memories of this beautiful soul, who sadly we lost just a short while ago at the end of August, a little over a week ago. And although we are sad and still somewhat shocked at this sudden loss, we go on to cherish not only his memory, but all that he left with us, all that we can use on our continued journey, as Wayne, I'm sure, continues on his. So, Laurie, welcome to Higher Journeys Radio, and thank you so much for joining us on a rather short notice.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show.
It's my pleasure, and although bittersweet, I'm really looking forward, and I know that our audience as well are looking forward to some of your interactions with Dr. Dyer. So, you wrote a touching piece recently, I loved it, in the Huffington Post about your friend Wayne as a tribute to how he affected you and your journey. And the piece is called, I love this, Pastrami and Wisdom, written with so much wit and so touching. And in the open of your piece, Laurie, you talk about how in 2006, during a time when you were going through a transition of your own, Wayne's words of wisdom helped you understand how, and I'm going to quote, God sweeps the table clean so that you can get ready to do something else. So if you would give us a little backdrop to this story, this encounter in 2006, we'd love to hear that.
I had actually interviewed Wayne a couple of times. I had an internet radio show called The Dr. Laurie Show on Genesis Communications Network, and I'd also had a religion column in the New York Times called Long Island at Worship, and I'd done a story about Wayne's protege, Immaculée Ilibagiza, who was a Rwandan refugee who had escaped the massacre by hiding out in a bathroom. And she had written a book about forgiveness and compassion and her mystical experiences while she was in hiding. Mm-hmm. And she lived on Long Island, and as part of the interview, I got to speak to Wayne and do a telephone interview. And as we were talking and kind of sharing life experiences, he invited me to have lunch with him when he was coming into New York, I guess the next month. And as it happened, my brother, Eric, who is the radio announcer for the Texas Rangers baseball team, was a huge fan of Wayne's, and he was going to be in town with the team on his birthday, which was May 16th. And so I asked Wayne if, would I be able to bring my brother along? And he said, sure, you can bring him along. Wayne's birthday was on May 10th, so they were both Tauruses. And Wayne said, yeah, sure, bring him along. And when we showed up at this deli in Midtown Manhattan, there was another brother-sister team there, also from Brooklyn, and that was Curtis Sliwa, who was the founder of the Guardian Angels, and which is a vigilante group, has been going for many, many years. And his sister, Alita St. James, who is a life coach and who had written a book and I think was looking for some advice from Wayne. And so we started talking about, isn't that odd that, interesting synchronicity that you would have two brother-sister kind of teams or duos showing up at this delicatessen to have lunch with Wayne Dyer. And when he showed up, we kind of went around the table, and then the guys started talking baseball, and Alita and I were talking about kind of life and parenting. And then Wayne kind of came back and was asking me about my column. And what happened was the New York Times had decided to cancel Long Island, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Westchester. All the Sunday sections were being canceled. And so, when you get a column in the New York Times, and I started my journalism career in 1968, so to finally have a column in the New York Times was kind of the pinnacle of my journalism career. And now it was just kind of being taken away, not because of my skill or lack of skill. It was a business decision, and I was, not happy about it. I mean, I wasn't devastated, but I was not pleased about it. And Wayne said something that really, kind of I've reminded of it over time, which was, well, sometimes when we get comfortable, he said, God kind of wipes the table clean. He kind of like he strips off the tablecloth. Because he wants you to get ready for something else, and kind of said that you don't be surprised if you start to get too comfortable, if God wipes the table clean.
That's poignant.
Very poignant, and it kind of took away, kind of the, I guess, self-recrimination, and, well, maybe if I'd done this. And, of course, the decision was completely out of my control and affected everybody who wrote for the section. It wasn't a personal decision or an editorial decision that was directed at me, but I was really pleased that he had told me something that kind of gave me kind of more of a meta view or an overview.
Yes.
And it kind of helped me to prepare spiritually for a lot of ups and downs that would be coming over the next 6 years or so.
Sure. That's it is, I'm going to say it again, very poignant. And, Laurie, he had spent so much of his life sharing this wisdom, often in metaphor with people. And, I think it takes a certain kind of ear to hear it and act on it. You like to think that whomever you're imparting whatever you can to, they're going to take your advice, and it doesn't happen for everybody, but you did, and I think that that's a wonderful thing that goes to show you how closely you're listening and aware and got it. You got that message. Well, it was Wayne who used the phrase, the afternoon of your life, right? And you wrote about that in the article too, versus the morning of your life. And so I want to read a quote of his that you referred to in your HuffPost article, if I may. He says, quote, "The afternoon of our lives represents the time when we begin to shift away from the ego and false self being the dominant force in our life. We begin a journey towards meaning. Now, the morning of our lives is really occupied by ambition, giving as much as you can, collecting as much stuff as you can get, impressing as many people as you can, preparing yourself for a job, saving your money, setting goals, pleasing everybody, doing the right thing, getting good grades in school. All this stuff that's revolved around the ego part of us really believes that who we are is what we get out of it and what we do and what other people think of us. That's basically the essence of the ego," end quote. And so this, of course, is a central theme, not only in your article, but in his wonderful film entitled The Shift, which I just had occasion to watch. I loved it. What does the afternoon of life mean to you, Laurie? And how did you process this message when you heard it directly from Wayne?
Well, actually, the phrase, if you don't mind, and Wayne had quoted Carl Jung as the person who came up with the phrase, the afternoon of life, which I had heard before. It's really referring to, when you get into your 40s and you're really looking at, for most people, the second half of life, or for most people, around the second half of life, a little more, a little bit less. And the things that obsessed us, I think the things that drove us early on in our life become less important. And we start to become more reflective about the things that really matter to us. Mm-hmm. Values become more important as opposed to externals. if we've been if you've been very driven or very kind of goal-oriented, sometimes you begin to reassess your goals or what kind of goals are important to you. Very often people will have career changes. I had a career change in my 40s. People will start to kind of look at, what is my legacy? How do I want to be remembered? Mm-hmm. And how do I want to live in a fulfilling way with the time I have left?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wasn't aware that it was Young that had coined that phrase. Yeah. And when I was watching The Shift the other day, I'm sure you've seen the film that Hay House did with Wayne Dyer, and in the very open of the film, you see him getting up at 3:30 in the morning. I wonder if he did that not every day, but most mornings. Got up at 3:30 and was ready for a 6:30, I think, interview shoot. But he gets up and he lights candles, and obviously he's going there sort of in solitude to write one of his books. And he had a Carl Jung book on the table. I was wondering, because I think I have most of Jung's works. But yeah, I know that he followed Jung, among many other, of course, Eastern philosophy, but in the area of psychology. So, okay, yeah, just wanted to digress for a minute there. Well, you had occasion to meet with him again, right, in 2009 that you mentioned. And I believe, was he diagnosed with cancer shortly after that?
He was diagnosed with cancer shortly after that.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
Actually, I met with him a few times when he came to New York to do his annual PBS special. He would do a fundraiser and kind of launch his new book. So I saw him several times. And we kind of lost touch around 2009, an occasional exchange of notes or voicemail messages. But he was diagnosed with cancer shortly after the interview that I did with him in 2009.
Yeah. And I believe you said that he spoke of his being aware of being in his afternoon of life.
Yeah, poignant.
Yeah. Did you look at that in retrospect and think, I wonder if this is implicit of that he sort of knew on some level that God was going to wipe the table clean and give him another sort of scenario to work with?
I think he sensed that that something literally internally was going on, and whether it was the way he was feeling or whether something was just telling him that there were going to be some challenges up ahead. I think he was kind of aware, but. He did continue traveling, not traveling as much, but he did continue to do seminars. He continued to come to New York to do his PBS specials. He still gave seminars on those Hay House cruises, and he continued to be prolific and
absolutely
as an author and as a seminar leader.
Sure.
Up until very recently.
Yeah. Well, again, this man, Wayne Dyer, struck me as someone who was extremely lucid and aware of his own journey, even if expressed in metaphor. And, I don't want to harp on his hardships and ultimately his end-of-life scenario, but I do want to get this in because I think it kind of speaks to what you and I have been talking about, his sort of feeling, his intuitive sense. He, in a Facebook post he made merely days before his passing, I think it was like August 27th, he said the following. I think this is like 3 days before he passed. He says, quote, "I have a suit in my closet with the pocket cut out. It's a reminder to me that I won't be taking anything with me. The last one I wear won't need any pockets." Laurie, do you think he had a sense on some level, even subconsciously, that he was about to make this transition?
I'm sure that he knew. I think people do know.
Yes.
They go into denial. And certainly he would have had medical reports that would document that he was no longer in remission. But I do need to share with you that Wayne Dyer did not have a computer, and he may have written something and asked somebody to post it for him, or he may have had an assistant who did all his online work for him. But he himself wrote longhand, and he refused to have email, and he did not have a computer.
That's interesting. Well, it's interesting that you say that, because going back to that movie, the Shift, where he's getting up 3:30 in the morning, he'd always say, thank you, thank you, thank you. And then he sits down with a yellow pad and pen with the candles starting to write. And I'm like, I wonder if he really does that. Like, does he really write in longhand? Wow. Okay.
That's right. He does.
That's something to be said. Wow.
Yeah. He refused to have email.
Yeah.
He had a cell phone, but he refused to have email.
Good for him. Well, you and I offline, we just talked about that, right? I think there's something to be said for that. I think it's a choice. I started to say a necessary evil, but it is a choice that we bring this technology into our lives. But I have to tell you, I still, as a writer, I have to write with a pen and pad. I think it does something to the brain when we exercise those muscles. So I hear to him for that. Well,
yeah. Definitely.
One little point I just want to make in terms of, who knows? Did he have a sense that his transition was coming? And I agree with you. I think a lot of people do. We've seen interesting behaviors of people, sometimes in exuberance just prior, even if it's an accident, an enthusiasm. So something about the human spirit is celebrating that they're about to go. So we don't know. But, I want to point out, I just recently heard, I think from the family actually, on the Facebook page, that the coroner's report was that he was still, there was no trace of leukemia in his body. He died of a heart attack. I don't know if you heard that.
No.
Yeah.
Just interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yep, just came out. So, okay, we don't want to focus on that.
That was his time.
Yeah, it was his time. It was his time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Yeah. Where do we go from here? What other stories can you tell us about Wayne?
Well, I wanted to mention that I'm actually launching a new, it's an online platform called MindBody Network, mindbodynetwork.com. And what we are is an integrated health and wellness community for providers and also people who can go to look for articles, information, online courses, everything, yoga, nutrition, intuition development, at some point meditation, and a lot of self-help information and programs and courses available. Mm-hmm. And if you go to MindBody Network, or your listeners would go to mindbodynetwork.com, there should be a link there to sign up to get a special report. This is a free special report, which was an interview that I did with Dr. Dyer in 2007, just called A Conversation with Dr. Wayne Dyer about the Tao. That he had been reading the Tao Te Ching, which was written 2,500 years ago by Chinese master Lao Tse. Mm-hmm. And the Tao offers a way of living in a state of flow and gentleness that really kind of took over Wayne's way of being. And after reading it, when he turned 65, he gave away everything that he owned. Mm-hmm. And moved, or he sold. Well, he gave away and he sold everything that he owned. And I guess he just took a backpack or a suitcase, and he moved to Hawaii.
That's when he moved to Hawaii. Okay.
Yeah. Of course, when Wayne Dyer gives everything away and moves to Hawaii, it's kind of like when Donald Trump goes bankrupt. He still gets to keep Atlantic City, and Wayne still, he didn't just show up and have to go to a hostel and scrounge for a place to stay. I mean, he had a very lovely place in Hawaii that was very comfortable. So it's not that he kind of took a vow of poverty or celibacy or whatever, but he did give everything away and kind of went and started over at the age of 65. And he said that, that the Tao brought him to a place of peace where he said, when the Tao, when you live the Tao, you become peace rather than talking about it. And he said that was really a big turning point for him in the afternoon of his life.
That is powerful. Obviously I knew that he was a student of the Tao, but I didn't know it was that late in his life. That's merely a decade ago. Wow.
Yeah. In fact, he wrote several books about the Tao, but there's one, and I think it came out in 2007, 2008, called "Living the Wisdom of the Tao," and then he did 2 or 3 other and a couple of CDs with Tao meditations. It really did shift him into a state of being at peace with everything that happened in his life, including the cancer diagnosis.
Yeah. He's had quite a few incarnations, was what I say when people are in the afternoon of their life, incarnations within one life, having grown up as a foster child, I think, till he was 10, and then time in the military. I mean, so many different lives, I would say, so many different shifts that he has made. And, I always got the sense, Laurie, that he was equally student as much as teacher. And he took what he learned as he was learning it and really sort of churned it. You know how I said in the beginning, the spiritual man with the churning hand. And you know what I'm talking about, right? He always expressed himself with his, I don't know if it was his left or right hand, spinning outward, turning. I would always pick that up, and I would notice, and that is a mannerism that some people have that are very expressive, but what I got from that is as he was taking in, learning, he was, that spinning outward of that hand was his sharing it, wanting to share that energy with whomever he was in the vicinity of. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, he was, yes. Very offering. His hand was always offering.
Offering, that's right.
Yeah.
I want people to look. I'm sure, we're probably going to see even more expressions of him, the films, the PBS specials, all sorts of interviews. You watch that hand. Watch the way that moves, everybody. I think it's amazing. That's no small thing. Well, there's no doubt that he stood for a passion to see a shift in the human species and our fundamental behavior and in our evolutionary trajectory. And you also mentioned in your piece, your HuffPost piece, that in which he cited a theory. Again, I want to quote, his mission had been distilled into one word. This is you talking. Pi, which equals 3.1416%. By that, he meant that if he could reach 3.1416% of the population and influence their thinking, that shift would be sufficient to align a new consciousness among the rest of the population. A key principle was showing people not to be afraid of loss. How did that strike you? Now, before you answer that, I've heard semblances of that before. I think Greg Braden has spoken to the square root of 1%. If that portion of the population could be shifted, it could be enough to shift the entire population. I think Ken Wilber has another calculation. So we're all kind of flirting with the same thing here. What are your thoughts on pi?
Well, honestly, I tend to be a little bit of a skeptic on those kinds of projections. I personally think it's going to take 50% or more shift in order to significantly change anything. But then I speak as somebody who's been working in journalism since 1968. So, my overview of a lot of the kind of huge archetypal forces that are at play right now are tremendous and violent and dark and disturbing. And we also have this big shift in consciousness where more people are emerging in the afternoon of life or even in the morning of life with a greater sense of compassion and connection and responsibility. So there is a kind of stream of change that's starting to happen. But it's kind of like pouring a bottle of something colored red into the ocean and then expecting the ocean to change color.
Yeah.
I mean, how much stuff do you have to pour into the ocean before it changes color? I mean, a lot.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Fair enough. Well, fair enough on that, Laurie. And what you're describing, I have termed many times the dichotomy of consciousness. I have a chapter in my book, Conscious Musings, called The Dichotomy of Consciousness and the Precipice of Change, in which we're seeing both of these aspects of the human consciousness, the ugliest of ugly, the greediest of greedy, you name it, along with the more altruistic parts that are emerging as well. So there is sort of this dichotomy, and I like to think that is signifying a precipice of change. The change, again, we don't know in what direction it's going to be. But so Wayne thought it was 3.1416. Greg Braden has his calculations, others have theirs, and you have yours. That's a great analogy that you gave about putting just a small percent of red water into the ocean, expecting it to turn. That's heavy.
Well, a lot of my work, now I work as in the field of trauma and particularly with people who have survived catastrophic events, to September 11th attack on the World Trade Center, or natural catastrophes like Hurricane Sandy, or have been victims of crimes or assaults in various parts of the world. And the amount of sorrow that is inflicted by these kind of turbulent, violent forces is it's so huge that sometimes it feels like you're trying to, empty the ocean, one teaspoon at a time. There is a lot of grieving that has to be processed, which very often people who are, in this kind of emerging consciousness movement are in denial that there's any kind of emotional price to pay.
That's a good point.
Change, it's kind of like the parting of the Red Sea. I mean, there's suffering that's involved along the way within the process of change, and some of that suffering, as we just see by watching the news. If you watch the news now, to me, it's like watching the news from the 1960s. I mean, just to talk about the racial upheaval in this country and all the sorrow that's been inflicted over the years by injustice. And then you see Syrian refugees. You see millions of people, kind of trying to find a place where they can, have a roof over their heads. The turmoil that we're in right now, I think it's a blessing because, again, like Wayne said, it kind of shakes up the status quo. And it's really, for most of us, not until we get really uncomfortable that we begin to make significant change. And I think that's part of what's happening. That this is kind of the turbulence is a catalyst, but it is not. I don't think you can really say 3% or 1%. I mean, I just think that's. I think that's a really nice metaphor for some kind of optimism, but the reality is, there are survival issues that millions and millions and millions of people face every day that have to be addressed, and there are injustices that have to be imbalanced, and there are huge social forces that have to shift along the way, and we can't pretend that that's not part of what has to happen for an overall consciousness shift to take place.
Right. Look, I appreciate your candor on that, and I think it is a tough discussion that people have, and I agree that particularly in what we call the new consciousness movement, that we have to be careful because there can be a bit of denial by just not looking. We think we're fixing it, and so I'm going to agree with you wholeheartedly. Let me ask you, and staying with Wayne, let's just be really candid with each other. In this calculation, albeit perhaps a metaphor, maybe in some people's cases they don't think it is, do you think Wayne may have been in a little bit of denial about this reality? I mean, being really honest.
I think that Wayne was aware of, with tremendous compassion about the level of suffering in the world, but he also led a very privileged life, which he was aware of as well. And I think when you're kind of a rock star, and you're extremely wealthy and you're famous, and you have a kind of halo around you, you're not really kind of living on the same world that most other people are. I mean, you don't have to worry about how you're going to pay your phone bill, for example, or you're not dealing with many of the same struggles that most people have to deal with. So it's easy to kind of say, well, look at what I went through. My father left and I was in foster care, and now I love him and I forgive him, and I mean, it's wonderful that he got to that point of serenity, and that he did a lot of work on himself to get there. At the same time, and I know that not everybody is blessed with the same opportunities and with the same good fortune that Wayne Dyer had, along the way. And that it's much easier to forgive when you're kind of in a state of beatitude, about life, because you can pretty much do whatever it is, you're graced with having whatever opportunities that you want to flower, will flourish for you, and that's not true for most people. Excuse me, it's true for a lot of people, but it's probably not true for the majority of people. And what Wayne tried to do is to get people to kind of shift their thinking so that more and more people would believe that creative change was possible for them,
Mm-hmm.
which is a huge thing. But it happens one person at a time.
That's right.
And change happens slowly, not quickly. It's a journey. And there are, even if you change your thinking, there's still no magic bullets.
Agreed.
You still have to do the work, and sometimes, no matter what you think, life is not going to give you what you think or what you want all the time, which is one of the big teachings of Buddhism,
Mm-hmm.
which is that, the source of all suffering is wanting. It's what the ego wants.
Mm-hmm.
We think that, if we could just get what we want, then we're going to be happy, but then you get what you want, and you want something else, or you don't want it, or it's not good enough, or someone else has something that you would rather want, and you're never, as long as you're programming your mind to try to get what you want, you're still kind of trapped on that wheel.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're trapped in the morning.
Right.
You're trapped in the morning of your life, right?
Still chasing that carrot.
Sure.
Whatever it is you think, and so when you stop wanting. And of course, if people are suffering and they're struggling with survival issues, or they're dealing with addiction issues, or they have severe family issues, domestic abuse issues, people have to live with tremendous courage and resilience in order to survive daily life.
Mm-hmm.
And for many people, the idea that you have to stop wanting is it doesn't make sense, because that's how people motivate themselves, to kind of move forward.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of like one of those Chinese finger puzzles, those kind of they're straw tubes, and you put one finger in one end and one finger in the other end, and the more you pull, the tighter the puzzle gets. So the more you're kind of trapped in wanting, then that's where your attention is. And a lot of the New Age, New Thought movement, and I read a lot of stuff, all the time, especially now for MindBody Network, this whole consciousness that, program your mind to get what you want, is not necessarily helpful in terms of helping people or guiding people to understand that wanting something and visualizing it isn't necessarily going to lead to a fulfilling life, and it's not always going to work.
That's right. Well, I think there's so many more components to that process of a manifestation and intention. I do think that there is a non-physical component, certainly, but I think a lot of it has to do with the feeling component. And, something else that it is, I've been a student of metaphysics for most of my life, really. The idea of want is a very, very sort of fragile and nebulous thing, because if you're in a state of want, and you feel that there's another aspect of you that's on the other end trying to fulfill your state of being, it's going to keep you in a perpetual state of want. Do you know what I mean? So I always thought that, getting what you want through fill in the blank was sort of a futile endeavor, because the subconscious is saying, oh, you want to be in a state of want? I'll keep you there. And therefore, you will never have the manifestation.
Right.
And that's a subtle and profound shift in thinking. I think I don't know. I think everybody has to kind of take it their own way and have this sovereign journey, is what I like to say. And look, Laurie, we live in a society that is predicated on what? You got this, now here's something else I want to give you. So society has, or the powers that be, if you will, have really indoctrinated the masses into this perpetual state of want.
Right.
That's complex, and it takes some silence, I think, and some contemplation to really kind of, wade through that. There are no silver bullets. I absolutely agree with you. And I respect what you've said about Wayne, and you're right. Sure, his wants may not have been on the material side, but I'm sure there were still, as I've said, I think he's still on a journey. I don't know that it ever ends, really.
I was interviewing a Native American shaman last year, and he was saying that the Lakota people believed that that life, our life is a seamless progression, and that this lifetime is not an independent lifetime, but what came before and what came next, what comes next, is all part of this one life path. And I think that's really true. Mm-hmm. We came from somewhere, we emerged from somewhere into this form and into this lifetime and incarnation, and when we cross over, we will be in another form, but we will be continuing to learn and to work and to study and to grow. It will be a continuation of the path that we're on right here in this dimension.
Mm-hmm. It's hard for people to get their arms around infinite, yes, never-ending. Alpha and Omega is what we're taught, that there is a beginning and there is an end, and yet, I don't know. It seems like some of our greatest perennial wisdoms tell us exactly the opposite, that it is a constant emergence in different forms. So, well, here's another quote that Wayne had on his Facebook page, or whoever is keeping it up, or had been. It says, "We are not our bodies, our possessions, or our careers. Who we are is divine love, and that's infinite." And we've heard that so often from so many warriors of spiritual wisdom, a simple and profound message: we are love, period. I'm going to stop there. First thing, do you feel that we are love?
Do I feel that we are love? We in the universal generic, or that each individual soul is love.
Well,
what do you mean by the we?
We, as our essence, individually and collectively. I don't know that I even feel comfortably saying. People talk about love in this context as not being an emotion, but literally a frequency, right? That it is, and it's hard. I suppose it's hard to understand because we always think of love, of attaching emotion to love, being in love with somebody, etc. But love is being just the purest form of all that is. It's very new agey, I know, but this is what he said. So that's what I'm talking about, and sort of a frequency.
I do believe that at the core we are loving and we are loved, and I do think that there is a frequency, just as there's a frequency of hate. Mm-hmm. There's a frequency of love. There's a frequency of connection. I think that the collective unconscious, or Wayne called it source, or Dr. Laurie Nadel calls it one mind. Mm-hmm. Right. There is a universal intelligence, if you will, or higher intelligence, and love is one of the frequency bands that we tap into. That's something to think about. One of the frequency bands, and again, some in the spiritual movement say that it is the ultimate. They're only they say that there are two things: love and fear, and everything else, including hatred, is sort of a derivative of fear, really. So I don't know. I think it's all, my favorite answer when someone asks a question these days is, I don't know. I don't. I'm still trying to work it out myself, and I doubt I'll do it in this lifetime. So. Right. I always say that I'm a very slow and stubborn learner, and that's taken me thousands of lifetimes to reach this point of ignorance.
Oh boy! Wow! Yeah. Well, I think if we keep contemplating, taking the words of wisdom with people like yourself included, and Wayne Dyer and Dr. Dossie, whom I've also had occasion to work with, let's just do that. Let's turn off that reality TV, guys. I don't think our audience does that too much, but and start. There's so much more to be thinking about, and this is one of them, as well as those issues of survival and the stuff that we're going through on a day-to-day that seems to be accelerating without question. I want to talk. I don't know if you want to dive into this or not. Let's digress a little bit from Wayne and talk about, I just learned that you did lose your home in Hurricane Sandy in 2012. That's a huge endurance of loss. How did you deal with that, and how did you deal with that loss and rebuilding emotionally as well as physically?
Well, in the time that it happened, it was kind of a mystical experience for me. I had actually spent 10 years between 1994 and 2004. I spent part of every year studying with shamans in different parts of South America, and particularly with a woman in Brazil who is considered like the Mother Teresa of Brazil. And in Brazil, along the coast and throughout the coast of the Southern Hemisphere, people speak and talk to and revere the Mother of the Sea the way, people inland and even here, talk about Mother Earth or Pachamama. And I've always had a very deep reverence and a very deep connection for the soul of the sea. Mm-hmm. And from the time I was a child, I grew up. I grew up in Brooklyn. I was always kind of biking or going down to the harbor and watching the boats and always felt at home right when I was right at the edge of where the water meets the land, which in shamanic wisdom, the places where the elements intersect, those are sacred vortexes. So something had kind of drawn me to that from the time I was a child. So learning about a very rich culture that goes back thousands of years, in which this is kind of like a sacred, there's a sacred element that is a whole spiritual tradition around honoring the spiritual intelligence of the ocean, was something that I was really happy to find out that I was not the only person in the world who felt like this.
Mm-hmm. No, not at all.
I'm the only person around here, but there are millions of people like me somewhere in the Southern Hemisphere.
Absolutely.
Both sides of the Atlantic. So when the water came in, and it came in unexpectedly. The house had never flooded. It came in through a back wall, it came in from a body of water that was 200 yards to the west, as opposed to the closest body of water, which was 80 yards to the north. And the house flooded very quickly, and then, it got up to about 4.5 feet. And I was completely at peace. I mean, I got the cat up to the attic. There's a little crawl space, and my boyfriend at the time was helping, and we put everything we could think of, upstairs in the attic because the water was covering everything. And when it got to be about chest height, we crawled up the stairs and then kind of watched the water making its way up the stairs and until the tide peaked. And I remember at one point seeing these waves of water just kind of pushing through my little cottage where I'd raised my kid, and it was a healing refuge for hundreds of people over the years, and watching it all be taken away. And basically it was destroyed the first half hour. And I felt like I was being lifted up, and I was being shown the nature of impermanence. And I just looked at everything kind of just dissolving. I mean, literally dissolving, the force of the waves and the salt water. And the couch started floating, and the refrigerator was knocked over. The giant refrigerator was floating, and the dryer was floating. These heavy appliances were floating. It was like watching the movie Titanic in your house.
Sure, absolutely.
So it was kind of awe-inspiring, because it felt like, wow, that there is a force that is so much greater than anything I could possibly understand. And what a miracle to be present, and to be present with this force, at this moment, and to bear witness to this, amazing event that is just wiping out, life as I know it is just being eradicated, which it was, in a very short period of time. And then at one point, I felt there was a spiritual presence, which I felt to be the Mother of the Sea. And clearly she had decided it was time to pay a visit. And so I felt that she was present, but there was an entity or a consciousness that was present that spoke to me and said, well, just as we are pushing out the walls of your house, the water is pushing out the walls around your heart, and you no longer need to have the construct of this cottage around you, because you will carry the peace and magic from here wherever you go. And that's what I was given at the height of the storm.
Wow. You have a proclivity, Laurie, I can tell, and I think you know this, to listen to listen to these subtle messages that I think still so many people are so preoccupied that they never hear, those synchronicities, those intuitions, the voice that's silent and loud at the same time. So I didn't know how you were going to describe when you said it was a what did you call it? Well, obviously a mystical experience, but an incredibly metaphysical experience in the midst of this emergency. That is really something. Have you documented this in writing? Have you told this?
Yeah, actually, I've got a couple of pieces on my website that I wrote about for the Huffington Post, and I've been working on a book proposal for a while. It's gone through several revisions, but it's kind of in process. But the hard part actually was not the storm or the loss, and the hard part was afterwards. And the hard part was dealing with the violence of what the destruction had done. The town sewer pump had broken during the storm surge, and so when the tide went out, everybody on this island and for the two or three towns around, the entire interior of everybody's home were toxic and contaminated, raw sewage. There was no water. And I had a series of dreams that started. The storm was on October 29th in 2012. And around May, June of 2012, I'd had a dream, and my father, who had died in 1989, appeared in the dream. And he said to me, Laurie, you need to buy water because there's going to be an emergency and you're going to need water. And I said in the dream, I said, okay, Dad, thanks. And then I went to the store and, I bought, if I remember it, a gallon of water here, a gallon of water there. And I had like 3 gallons of water. And then around July 4th, just after July 4th, my favorite uncle, who had died like a year later, he showed up in a dream and he said, Laurie, you're not taking this seriously. We really need you to buy more water. Something's going to happen and you're going to need to have extra water. So really pay attention. So I said, all right, thank you, Uncle Nick. And I went out and I bought a few more gallons of water. And then around Labor Day, my father showed up again in a dream. This time, he was wearing his lab coat. He'd been a dentist, and he was very stern. And he was really angry at me. And he said, Laurie, you're not taking us seriously. This is the second time I've come back. And there's going to be an emergency, and you're going to have drinking water. You have to have water. You must go out and buy water. You have to listen. And you have to go get water. So I told my boyfriend, and we started bringing water in, and I had like 14 gallons of water and cases of water, and a lot of it was actually up in the attic, and so it was usable. And when the tide went out and the water supply was completely contaminated, the Red Cross was nowhere to be seen for a few days, and there was literally no water. And I was able to give people water, which was incredible.
So it wasn't just for you, it was for the people.
Right.
Isn't that something? Well, and you hear these stories, you and I both as in this field as writers and as experiencers, and I don't know about you, but I never cease to be amazed. These were clear, as Dr. Larry Dossey so lucidly calls them, among other things, presentiments. I think that's actually Dr. Jean Radin's phrase, but precognitions.
Right.
That I tend to have quite frequently, but it never. How did you feel? I mean, you had to know. You obviously knew something was on the horizon here. But when Hurricane Sandy hit, or you had a little bit of time to reflect, I'm sure your mind went back to those dreams, right? How did you react? Did you say, "Wow, this is really"? That wasn't a dream. That was a message, obviously.
Interesting that there is a feeling that I can pick up, that other people can, many people can pick up. Animals pick it up.
Oh yes,
and it's a shift in the energy field around us, or some people call it the matrix, and in Star Wars they call it the Force. But there's like a shift in the Force, and people feel it. Mm-hmm. And people were coming to me in the spring of 2012 saying, something really big is going to happen, something really bad is going to happen. It feels like it did before, the summer before September 11th, when a lot of people were having a sense of dread, and there was it was in the collective unconscious that something huge was about to happen. And,
mm-hmm.
and I neighbors and people were coming in and saying, I don't know what's wrong with me. I wake up in the morning, I have knots in my stomach. I feel like I haven't felt this way since the summer before September 11th. Is there something wrong with me? And I'd say, no, something's coming, and we're feeling it.
Absolutely.
And we're all feeling it.
Yeah, I think some people...
That was clear that something, we didn't know what, and of course, as New Yorkers, our first thought was, there's some kind of terrorist attack. I don't think anybody thought in terms of a natural catastrophe that would affect 1 million people on 1,000 miles of coastline. But in the level of the collective unconscious, the warnings were coming through very clearly that something major was going to happen, and that it was going to be really, that the ripple effect is still have left many people unable to get back in their homes. They didn't receive assistance that they needed to rebuild. People have gone bankrupt. People have the marriages are starting to fall apart because of the strain of debt and overexposure financially. I run 2 support groups in my community, and people are very anxious that what if there's another hurricane, and even if it's not 4.5 feet of water, still even 3 inches of water or 5 inches of water, you're going to have to go through the same process of rebuilding and fighting with insurance companies and dealing with all the institutions that are supposed to protect us, but which actually do nothing to protect us when catastrophe strikes.
Yep. Well, we're winding down. We only have a few minutes left, but I want to go back. This is still, again, because you don't continue to hear it in the headlines, it's sort of out of sight, out of mind for people that aren't intimately connected to it. But going back to this sort of precognition, this collective precognition that we are aware of, that, many are aware that these things happen. I have heard record amounts of stories, every version of precognitive hunch prior to 9/11 and with other things. Including, by the way, I want to wind down with Wayne a little bit. Right around the time that Wayne passed, I wasn't feeling so great. I tend to be, I don't know, maybe even hypersensitive. I think some people can be even a little bit more attuned with environment, and it's often difficult to delineate if it's an individual situation or a collective situation. But right around the time of Wayne's loss, and even about a week or so before, in fact, the day that, if you recall, the reporter and cameraman from Virginia were shot on quote live TV, I had a crisis with my cat. It sounds like we're both cat lovers, cat owners.
Me too. Yeah.
My cat had a urinary blockage, unbeknownst to us. We didn't even know there was such a thing. Was fine on Tuesday. On Wednesday, all hell broke loose, and we had to rush him into emergency surgery, or else that was it. He's still in a cage right now recuperating. But I got to tell you, I want to wind this back to, that happened the day of the Virginia shooting. We've been my stomach has been in knots for the last week or so dealing with this, as well as some other things. Wayne passes away. And, I still feel like there's something out of kilter right now. How do you feel?
I agree with you. I
like right now.
Yeah. Yeah,
globally.
I do agree with you. There's something on the horizon, and it's unsettling, whatever it is.
Have other people been coming to you at all?
Yes, yeah.
Within, the last week, too?
Well, it's just people feeling, like again, this kind of unsettled feeling like, something is around the corner now. As I said, in New York, we every year around the anniversary of September 11th, people are re-traumatized with sights and images, and the footage gets replayed, and so some of the unsettledness is just kind of the anniversary triggers of a traumatic event. But there is a feeling that there is something kind of unsettled, kind of on the horizon. Possibly something major, because the economy, could become very volatile in the next few months. It's already started, to get into like major volatility, and there's always a fear that that there could be some kind of an economic or financial recession or correction or whatever they call it So some of it, is obviously geared around that. I don't know, what it is, but there is something that's unsettled. And it's interesting you mentioned, what you felt before Wayne died. That the day that Wayne died, I was driving my daughter and son-in-law to the train, and we stopped at a traffic light, and suddenly I just felt that there was like this dropout. It got very, 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 very quiet, which is what I used to feel in the newsroom. It would get really quiet, and then within 48 hours, there would be some like major, huge news event that would happen. But there was always a period where literally the phones would stop ringing and the teletypes would slow down, and everything would just kind of like somebody hit the pause button, and you could practically taste it. And that's what I experienced at that traffic light. And I said to my daughter and my son-in-law, I said, it's too quiet. And they said, what do you mean it's too quiet? And I explained it to them, and because my daughter rolled her eyes and said, oh, yeah, right, Mom. And I said, no, it means that there is going to be a big news story within the next 48 hours. I said, that's what I always feel it. I said, other people feel it. People in the business feel it, or they don't talk about it that much. And there will be a big story. And then by that evening, I learned that Wayne died, and that certainly was a big story to millions of people, and to me on a personal level as well.
Sure.
And
isn't it amazing how, and we go back to this, Dr. Jossie's idea of this one mind. There have been so many different ways it's been described, but this continuum of consciousness that we are tethered to, everything that has sort of cropped up in this conversation, Laurie, which has been fabulous, including a tribute to Wayne, has intimated that we are so much more than our bodies, right? Just we are not our bodies, our possessions, or our careers. Who we are is divine love. You can call it divine love, divine consciousness.
Right.
Not just Wayne or you or me or some Swami over here, but every single person. It's our, I started to say birthright. It's even before our birth, obviously. So
well, I think it's part of what we're here to experience, and I sometimes use the term spiritual DNA, and as in the last book that I wrote with Jim Baird, it's called Happiness Genes: Unlocking the Positive Potential Within Your DNA. I talked about what I call spiritual DNA, and sometimes we have the soul has a blueprint for what we're meant to experience in this lifetime, and each of these experiences, I think, is supposed to kind of strip away, if you will, a layer of denial or a layer of mask, and so we become closer and closer to resonating with that higher wavelengths, if you will.
Well said. Perfect way to close this. Well, before we sign off, and by the way, we're going to sign off, but I don't want you to hang up because I want to have a proper goodbye offline. I always forget to tell my guests this. Tell us where we can find more of your great work. You mentioned the website before. Please mention it again, and we'll make sure to list it.
Well, first, I hope that you'll mention MindBodyNetwork.com,
Absolutely.
and people will be able to sign up to receive our news. You, as a practitioner and an internet radio host and an author, hope that you'll join our community. There's no charge to join, and you get your own webpage and can post your own blogs and articles and information. And if you're interested, if you have any online courses, we'd be happy to consider having them on mbn.com.
Excellent.
And there will be a free special report, a conversation with Dr. Wayne Dyer about the Tao.
Excellent.
That you can request for signing up. My work can be found on laurienadel.com, and you can contact me through the website, which is Laurie, LaurieNadel.com.
Excellent. Oh, boy, that's fantastic. And I'm so happy to thank you, by the way, for the invitation with the form that you've gotten. And by the way, audience, Laurie and I, although we have never met in person, I hope that we get to one day, are a part of another beautiful group. That's how we know each other, through a group that is led by Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove. What a pleasure, even under these circumstances. And, we had a little tough time getting started, and I said to Laurie, I wonder if Wayne is like, okay, I've had enough people talking about me. I'm going to just throw a little wrench into your action here, because enough is enough. You wonder if it was Wayne. So cheers to you, Dr. Wayne Dyer. Cheers to you, Laurie Nadel, for all you do and for sharing your recollections and your incredible insight, literally. Thank you so much. Just as we are pushing out the walls of your home, the water is pushing out the walls around your heart. This message that came to Dr. Laurie in the midst of losing her home to Hurricane Sandy, she says brought a sense of calm, not after the storm, but right in the middle of it. These are sentiments that I'm sure Wayne Dyer would have agreed with. As he so elegantly put it, God sweeps the table clean so that you can get ready to do something else. And now he too has moved on to do something else as he journeys past the afternoon of his life and swims into new waters. On behalf of Dr. Laurie Nadel and all of the people along the way that you've touched, we salute you, Dr. Dyer, for all that you've left us with. May you soar to new heights on your continued journey.